The Zirith Empire had conquered countless worlds, leaving behind ruins and submission in their wake. Their reputation as galactic conquerors was unmatched, and no species had ever truly resisted their overwhelming firepower. When they turned their eyes toward a small blue planet called Earth, they saw no challenge, no threat, just another easy conquest. Their war councils laughed at the primitive defenses, the lack of space fleets, and the absence of interstellar colonies. The Zirith believed that humans, like all the others before them, would kneel before the might of their empire. They had no idea that this time, things would be different. The invasion began like all others. Their warships entered Earth's orbit undetected, their stealth technology superior to anything the humans had encountered. A fleet of landing crafts descended toward the surface, carrying thousands of Zirith soldiers armed with plasma rifles and reinforced battle armor. The orders were simple: subjugate the local governments, neutralize resistance, and secure control of major cities. The first wave of invaders deployed across multiple continents, expecting quick surrenders and minimal casualties. But the moment their boots touched the ground, everything went wrong. Instead of frightened civilians fleeing in terror, the humans organized in ways the Zirith had never seen before. Military forces responded within minutes, moving with precision and coordination that stunned the invaders. Civilians didn't panic, they adapted. Roads were blocked, communications were scrambled, and every attempt to establish control was met with unexpected resistance. In past invasions, the Zirith would encounter fear-driven chaos. But here, they found something terrifying: defiance. The humans didn't just fight back, they planned their counterattacks with lethal efficiency. Every street turned into a battlefield, every building into a fortress, and every ambush became a lesson that the invaders struggled to survive. The Zirith command underestimated humanity's ability to adapt. They assumed that superior numbers and advanced technology would be enough, but the humans had something far deadlier: strategy. Instead of engaging in direct confrontations, human forces used asymmetric warfare, striking from unexpected angles before disappearing into the urban landscapes. Soldiers operated in small, highly skilled units, using Earth's terrain to their advantage. The invaders' supply lines were cut, their communication towers destroyed, and their commanders found themselves isolated and vulnerable. The first real shock came when an entire battalion of Zirith troops disappeared without a trace. A search party was sent to investigate, only to find a horrifying scene: rows of destroyed Zirith armor, plasma rifles abandoned on the ground, and no sign of the soldiers who had wielded them. The few survivors babbled incoherently about nightmarish attacks, about shadows moving faster than they could react. Fear spread among the invasion force. These humans were not prey, they were something else entirely. Zirith reinforcements were deployed, determined to break the resistance. They launched heavy bombardments on key human strongholds, expecting immediate surrender. But instead of crushing their will, the attacks only made humans more relentless. Cities were evacuated in record time, soldiers moved in unpredictable ways, and the more destruction the Zirith caused, the more unified the human response became. For the first time in the history of the Zirith Empire, an invasion force was struggling to maintain control. Days turned into weeks, and still, victory remained out of reach. Reports came in from across the planet: small bands of human fighters taking down entire squads, human engineers repurposing captured Zirith technology, and military leaders devising tactics that forced the invaders into costly engagements. The Zirith, despite their advanced technology, found themselves unable to hold their ground. Their forces were dwindling, their morale crumbling. And worst of all, they began to realize that humans were learning. Every battle made them more dangerous. Every failed attack made them smarter. Zirith High Command, watching from orbit, could not believe what was happening. No species had ever resisted for this long. Their forces were superior in every measurable way except one. The humans possessed something the Zirith had never encountered before. They refused to break. Their ability to endure, to think, to adapt was unlike anything in the known galaxy. The Zirith had believed that war was about strength, about numbers and firepower. But humans had shown them something new: war was about resilience, and no species was more resilient than mankind. Desperation set in among the Zirith leadership. They ordered a final push, a full-scale assault to end the war before it spiraled further out of control. Thousands of troops were deployed in a last-ditch effort to crush humanity's defenses. They landed in key cities, expecting to overwhelm the remaining forces. But they had miscalculated once again. The moment they touched down, they found themselves walking into an elaborate trap. The humans had baited them. Entire divisions of Zereth troops were funneled into kill zones, their escape routes cut off, their reinforcements too slow to react. It was not an invasion anymore, it was an extermination. Panic spread through the Zereth ranks. The invaders, who had once believed they were the apex predators of the galaxy, were now prey. Commanders sent frantic distress signals to their warships, begging for extraction. The skies were no longer safe, as human anti-air defenses targeted incoming dropships. The ground was a nightmare, every street a battlefield controlled by human warriors who fought with terrifying precision. The Zereth no longer had a path to victory. There was only one option left: retreat. The invasion fleet began withdrawing, abandoning their stranded troops as they fled back to orbit. The Zereth had lost. For the first time in their history, they had been defeated not by superior firepower, not by overwhelming force, but by something far more terrifying: human willpower. From the moment they had landed, they had underestimated their enemy. Now, they would carry the scars of that mistake forever. As the last warships left Earth's atmosphere, a final message was transmitted to the Zereth command, a simple warning from the human leaders: do not return. It was not a threat. It was a promise. The Zereth had learned a lesson that every species in the galaxy would soon hear whispered in fear: you only go to war with humans once. The Cathari Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries, expanding their empire with brutal efficiency. They saw themselves as the ultimate warriors, their genetically enhanced bodies built for combat, their minds sharpened by centuries of conquest. No species had ever stood against them for long. Every time a new world was discovered, the outcome was inevitable: resistance crushed, civilizations subjugated, and entire populations forced into servitude. When they learned of a small, isolated planet called Earth, they expected nothing different. Their intelligence reports described a species with no interstellar travel, no energy-based weaponry, and no planetary defenses strong enough to pose a challenge. To the Cathari warlords, it was another routine conquest, another step in their empire's endless expansion. But what they failed to understand was that for the first time in their long history, they had made a mistake, one that would change everything. The invasion force arrived in Earth's orbit under the cover of darkness, their ships cloaked against detection. Cathari warriors had conquered countless worlds in the same way: land, overwhelm, and dominate. They saw no reason to alter their strategy. Thousands of drop pods rained from the sky, filled with heavily armed troops, their armor resistant to most known projectile weapons. Their commanders watched with amusement as human defense forces scrambled in confusion. The Cathari expected panic, surrender, or at best, a weak attempt at resistance. But the humans reacted in a way the invaders had never encountered before. Instead of chaos, there was coordination. Instead of fear, there was resolve. And instead of a swift victory, the Cathari found themselves caught in a nightmare of their own making. The first sign of trouble came when the initial assault teams landed in major cities. The Cathari were used to open battlefields, where their superior strength and advanced technology gave them the advantage. But the humans fought differently. They didn't stand in formation and engage in direct combat. Instead, they vanished into buildings, moved through underground tunnels, and struck from the shadows. The Cathari's advanced armor was designed to withstand energy weapons, but human bullets tore through the gaps in their plating. Their towering size, once an advantage on the battlefield, made them easy targets in narrow alleyways and dense urban landscapes. Every street became a death trap, every corner a potential ambush. Cathari soldiers, trained for overwhelming frontal assaults, found themselves disoriented and vulnerable. At first, their commanders dismissed the resistance as insignificant. They believed that with enough force, the humans would break. They unleashed heavier firepower, destroying entire blocks in an attempt to root out the defenders. But this only made the humans fight harder. Instead of falling apart, the resistance became more organized. Civilians armed themselves, soldiers adapted their tactics, and captured Cathari weapons were quickly repurposed against their former owners. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were learning. And for the first time, the Cathari began to understand that this was no ordinary conquest. As days passed, the situation worsened. Cathari warships in orbit started receiving distress signals from their ground forces, reports of squads disappearing without a trace, of entire battalions wiped out in the dead of night. Snipers picked off officers with terrifying precision. Supply convoys were ambushed before they could reach the front lines. Cathari commanders, who had once laughed at the idea of human resistance, now spoke in hushed tones about the enemy they could not see. The humans fought like no species they had ever encountered. They did not retreat in fear, nor did they throw themselves into suicidal charges. They were patient, calculating, and relentless. And worst of all, they refused to break. Panic spread through the ranks of the invaders. The Cathari had always believed in their superiority, but that belief was now being shattered with every failed assault, with every lost soldier, with every battle where humans adapted faster than the invaders could. The very traits the Cathari had overlooked, human ingenuity, determination, and resilience, were now proving to be the deadliest weapons in this war. What started as an invasion had become a desperate struggle for survival. In one final attempt to regain control, the Cathari launched a massive counteroffensive, sending their most elite warriors into the heart of human resistance. It was meant to be a decisive blow, a show of force that would crush all hope. But it only sealed their fate. The humans had been waiting for this. The Cathari found themselves walking into a battlefield they did not understand, an urban war zone meticulously prepared by an enemy that had studied their every move. Every street had been transformed into a defensive stronghold, every building a potential sniper nest, every alleyway a carefully planned kill zone. The elite forces of the Cathari Dominion, the most feared warriors in the galaxy, were cut down with brutal efficiency. The few who managed to escape carried with them stories of human warriors who fought like demons, who never gave up, who never stopped. Defeat was undeniable. The Cathari, who had believed themselves invincible, had been beaten not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by something far more powerful, the will of a species that refused to be conquered. The invasion fleet, once so confident in its victory, now faced an impossible choice. They could stay and be annihilated, or they could retreat and live to tell the tale of the one world that had defied them. The decision was made swiftly. The Cathari withdrew from Earth, abandoning their remaining forces, leaving behind only ruins and the echoes of a war they would never forget. As their warships disappeared into the void, a final transmission was sent from Earth's leaders to the retreating invaders. It was not a declaration of war, nor was it a plea for peace. It was a warning, a message that would spread across the galaxy, carried by the broken remnants of the Cathari forces. This was your first mistake. Do not make another. For the first time in their long history, the Cathari Dominion had faced an enemy they could not conquer. And they knew, with absolute certainty, that if they ever returned, they would not be given a second chance. The first mistake had been made. There would not be a second. The war had dragged on longer than anyone had expected. The Elthari Imperium, one of the most dominant forces in the galaxy, had launched their campaign against Earth with absolute certainty of victory. Humanity, they believed, was just another primitive species barely capable of space travel, let alone interstellar warfare. The Elthari had seen it before. Countless civilizations had fallen before them, unable to withstand their advanced technology, their disciplined fleets, and their overwhelming military might. At first, everything went according to plan. Their dreadnoughts shattered Earth's orbital defenses within hours, their ground troops landed in major cities unchallenged, and their commanders prepared to deliver the final blow that would bring humanity to its knees. But something happened that no Elthari strategist had anticipated. The humans did not surrender. They did not flee in terror. Instead, they fought with a desperation the Elthari had never encountered before. And in that moment, the war changed forever. At first, the resistance seemed futile. Human weapons were vastly inferior to the plasma rifles and energy cannons of the Elthari. Their soldiers lacked the cybernetic enhancements and combat implants that made Yelthari warriors so deadly. Every logical prediction suggested that humanity would crumble within weeks. And yet, weeks turned into months. Battles that should have been over an hour stretched into days, then weeks. The Yeltari, who had never fought an enemy that could truly challenge them, found themselves locked in a war that refused to end. They controlled Earth's skies, its oceans, its orbit, but they did not control the ground. Every city became a battlefield, every street a war zone. The humans did not fight for land or resources. They fought for survival, for their very existence, and that made them far more dangerous than the Yelthari had imagined. The first real sign that the war was not going as planned came when the Yelthari High Command received reports of entire battalions going missing. It made no sense. Their troops were stronger, faster, and better equipped. How could primitive humans simply erase them? The answer became horrifyingly clear in the coming weeks. The humans had stopped fighting the way the Yelthari expected. They abandoned conventional warfare and turned to guerrilla tactics, striking fast and vanishing before the Yelthari could retaliate. Every supply line was a target, every convoy an ambush waiting to happen. Yelthari forces, who had never before faced such resistance, struggled to adapt. Their technology, once their greatest strength, became a weakness. Energy weapons required constant recharging, advanced armor needed maintenance, and cybernetic implants malfunctioned in Earth's harsh conditions. Meanwhile, humans adapted. They scavenged, they improvised, and most terrifying of all, they learned. Every battle made them stronger. Every loss taught them new strategies. The Yelthari were not just fighting a species. They were fighting an idea, an unbreakable will, and it was wearing them down. Morale among the invaders began to break. The Yelthari were not prepared for a war of attrition. They had always relied on swift, overwhelming force to win battles before they could truly begin. But against humanity, that strategy failed. Their fleets remained powerful, their technology unmatched, yet none of it mattered if they could not hold the ground. Every day, their losses mounted. Entire regiments disappeared into the ruins of human cities. Their remains never recovered. Night raids became a nightmare. Yelthari soldiers, once fearless, began to fear the dark, knowing that somewhere out there, human operatives were waiting. Panic spread like wildfire through the ranks. The great and mighty Yelthari Imperium had never known fear until now. The turning point came when the humans did something no one had believed possible. They took the war to space. The Yelthari had assumed their orbital superiority was absolute. Their warships were the pinnacle of galactic engineering, each one capable of destroying entire fleets with ease. But once again, the humans defied expectations. They did not match the Yelthari in firepower. They did not build massive dreadnoughts or energy-based superweapons. Instead, they used their greatest weapon, their minds. Infiltrators boarded Yelthari stations, sabotaging key systems. Ground-based missile systems targeted weak points in the Yelthari fleet, using data stolen from captured enemy equipment. And in the boldest move of all, human engineers managed to hijack a Yelthari battleship, turning the invaders' own firepower against them. It was a message, clear and undeniable. The Yelthari were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. Panic reached the highest levels of the Yelthari command. They had never lost a war before. Never. But now, they were faced with the undeniable reality that they were losing. Their forces were stretched thin, their fleets suffering losses they could not replace, their armies demoralized and afraid. The cost of continuing the war was rising with every passing day. And worst of all, the humans showed no signs of breaking. The Imperium had, in a final, desperate act, the Yelthari attempted to unleash their ultimate weapon, a planet-destroying device designed to erase entire civilizations in an instant. It was meant to be their last resort, a guarantee that no enemy could ever truly defeat them. But once again, they had underestimated humanity. The humans had anticipated this move. Before the weapon could be activated, a coordinated assault took out its control systems, disabling it permanently. The Yelthari's final hope was gone. Their greatest weapon had failed them. And at last, they understood what they had refused to see all along. This was not just another war. This was not just another conquest. This was a lesson. A lesson in the cost of arrogance. A lesson in the power of an enemy they had never respected. The retreat order was given. The once mighty Yelthari Imperium, undefeated for centuries, was now forced to abandon its greatest invasion. Their warships, battered and broken, limped away from Earth, carrying with them the scars of a battle they would never forget. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. A species that had once been seen as weak, primitive, and unworthy had done the impossible. They had turned the tide against one of the most powerful empires in existence. And as the last Yelthari ship disappeared from the Sol system, the message was clear: humanity was not to be underestimated. For the Yelthari, this war had been a humiliation, a disaster that would haunt them for generations. But for humanity, it was something else entirely. It was a beginning. They had faced an enemy far beyond their strength and survived. They had stood against an empire and won. And now, as they looked to the stars, they knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not the end. This was only the turning point. The Yelthari Imperium had never suffered such humiliation. Their mighty fleets, once thought invincible, had been forced to retreat from Earth, beaten and broken. What was meant to be a swift conquest had turned into a drawn-out nightmare, and now their forces were barely holding on to the few strongholds they had left in the Sol system. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. But the war was not over yet. Desperation had set in among the Yelthari commanders, and in their desperation, they prepared for one last attempt to turn the tide. If they could not win through strategy, they would win through sheer devastation. Their plan was simple: crush humanity with overwhelming force, break their will to fight, and leave nothing but ashes behind. And so, the remnants of the Yelthari fleet gathered for one final assault, hoping to achieve what they had failed to do before. Humanity, however, was ready. They had been fighting for too long, had suffered too much, to back down now. They had watched their cities burn, their people slaughtered, their world threatened with extinction. But they had fought back, harder than anyone had expected, and now they stood on the brink of victory. The Yelthari's retreat had given them time to rebuild, time to learn, time to prepare for the inevitable. The moment humanity realized that the invaders would return, they began planning for this exact battle. Every weakness in the Yelthari strategy had been studied, every mistake analyzed, every possible countermeasure put in place. This time, the humans would not just survive. They would end the war once and for all. The Yelthari fleet arrived in overwhelming numbers, more ships than had ever been seen in one place before. Their dreadnoughts, towering and monstrous, cast long shadows across the stars, their weapons charged and ready to fire. Thousands of fighter ships swarmed around them like an unstoppable storm. This was their last gamble, a final demonstration of their power, and if they won, the war would be over in their favor. But the moment they entered the battlefield, they realized something was wrong. Humanity had not launched a desperate defense. They had not hidden in fear. Instead, they had prepared an ambush. The first explosions ripped through the Yelthari fleet before they could even react. Hidden weapon platforms, scattered throughout the asteroid field surrounding Earth's orbit, opened fire with devastating precision. The Yelthari had assumed space itself was empty, that humanity had no way of challenging them in open battle. They were wrong. Missile silos buried beneath the lunar surface launched a relentless barrage of projectiles, cutting through enemy formations. The Yelthari's once impenetrable shields, already weakened from months of fighting, began to fail. And then, the human fleet emerged. They were not the largest ships. They were not the most advanced. But they were fast, maneuverable, and, most importantly, commanded by soldiers who had spent the entire war learning every tactic the Yelthari used. Human warships weaved between the massive enemy dreadnoughts, targeting weak spots with terrifying accuracy. They did not fight like a conventional navy. They fought like hunters, striking and vanishing before the enemy could retaliate. The Yelthari, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with superior firepower, found themselves struggling to keep up. Every move they made, the humans had already predicted. Every tactic they used had already been countered. The war that had once been theirs to win had now become their worst nightmare. But the humans were not just fighting in space. On the ground, in the last remaining Yelthari strongholds on Mars and Titan, the final battles had begun. Human soldiers, hardened by years of brutal warfare, stormed enemy fortifications with ruthless efficiency. They had once been at a disadvantage, outmatched by the Yelthari's superior weapons and technology. Not anymore. Every weapon, every armor piece, every combat strategy had been adapted from the enemy themselves. Now, the fight was even, and in a fair fight, the Yelthari had no chance. The turning point came when humanity executed their most daring maneuver yet. A team of infiltrators, disguised using stolen Yelthari technology, managed to board the enemy flagship, the command vessel that controlled the entire fleet. It was a suicide mission, a last gamble, but if they succeeded, it would mean the end of the war. The team moved quickly, disabling security systems, sabotaging key control points, and finally reaching the ship's core systems. They had one objective: to disable the fleet's coordination systems, throwing the Yelthari into complete disarray. They succeeded. The moment the Yelthari flagship went dark, the rest of the fleet fell into chaos. Without centralized command, their once perfect formations shattered. Confusion spread like wildfire as ships crashed into each other, their communication networks disrupted. Human forces seized the opportunity, launching an all-out assault. One by one, the massive dreadnoughts fell, their mighty hulls torn apart by relentless attacks. The battle that had begun as the Yelthari's final stand had now turned into their complete destruction. In the final moments, the Yelthari leaders realized the truth they had lost. Their empire, once unchallenged, had been humbled by a species they had once considered insignificant. There was no hope left. Their forces were in ruins, their commanders dead or captured, their fleets shattered beyond repair. The order was given. The remnants of the Yelthari forces, what little remained, fled the battlefield, abandoning their once glorious campaign. The war was over. But humanity did not celebrate. They did not cheer or rejoice. They had won, yes, but the cost had been immense. Their world had been scarred, their people had suffered, and the price of victory had been paid in blood. But they had proven one thing to the galaxy: that humanity was not to be underestimated. They were survivors. They were fighters. And they would never again be caught unprepared. As the last Yelthari ship disappeared into the void, humanity looked to the future. This war had been their greatest challenge, their darkest hour. But now it was over, and in its place, a new era had begun. The Yelthari would never forget the lesson they had learned. The galaxy would never forget the war that had changed everything. And as humanity rebuilt, stronger than before, they knew that no matter what came next, they would be ready. Because when the final blow had been struck, it was not just the Yelthari Imperium that had fallen. It was the old order of the galaxy itself. And humanity, against all odds, had risen to take its place among the stars. The Galactic Dominion had ruled for centuries, expanding its influence across the stars, crushing civilizations that dared to resist. Every war had ended the same way, with their enemies broken and their territories absorbed into the ever-growing empire. When they first encountered humanity, they saw no reason to believe things would be any different. Earth was a small planet, its people scattered and divided. Their technology was primitive compared to the Dominion's advanced fleets. Conquering them would be nothing more than a formality, another routine operation. The Dominion sent a single war fleet, expecting a swift surrender. But what followed was not submission, it was the beginning of their worst nightmare. At first, the Dominion forces landed with confidence, their soldiers marching through human cities, expecting immediate compliance. But instead of fear, they were met with defiance. Humanity fought back, using tactics the Dominion had never encountered before. They were relentless, unpredictable, and, most disturbingly, willing to sacrifice everything to win. The Dominion had faced resistance before, but never like this. Their usual methods: intimidation, destruction, overwhelming force, only seemed to make humans fight harder. The more cities they destroyed, the more determined the humans became. The Dominion commanders, accustomed to swift victories, found themselves facing an enemy that refused to break. The war dragged on longer than expected. The Dominion's fleets controlled the skies, but on the ground, the humans turned every street, every ruined building, into a battlefield. They adapted, learning the enemy's weaknesses, exploiting every mistake. They refused to fight conventionally. Instead, they struck in the dead of night, vanished into the shadows, and reappeared where they were least expected. The Dominion's forces, trained for large-scale battles, struggled against this new kind of warfare. Supplies ran thin. Morale dropped. For the first time in history, an invasion did not go as planned. The Dominion's high command grew impatient. They sent reinforcements, increasing the number of warships orbiting Earth. If humanity refused to surrender, they would be crushed entirely. But what the Dominion had failed to understand was that humanity was not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for revenge. The Dominion had given them no choice but to evolve, to adapt, to become stronger than they had ever been before. The longer the war lasted, the more dangerous humanity became. They scavenged enemy weapons, reverse-engineered their technology, and built defenses that the Dominion had never anticipated. It was no longer a battle for control. It was a battle for the future. Then came the moment that changed everything. A Dominion war fleet, one of the largest ever assembled, descended upon Earth's final strongholds. The humans were outnumbered, their defenses stretched thin. The Dominion believed this would be the end, but humanity had been waiting. They had studied their enemy, learned their patterns, predicted their every move. And when the Dominion launched their final assault, they walked straight into a trap. The skies above Earth erupted in chaos. Hidden missile platforms emerged from beneath the oceans, launching devastating attacks against the Dominion ships. Human fighter squadrons, now equipped with stolen Dominion technology, moved with unmatched precision, targeting critical weaknesses in the enemy fleet. On the ground, human forces launched a counterattack, striking the Dominion's command centers with a level of coordination that shocked their invaders. In a matter of hours, the Dominion's once mighty fleet was in ruins. The invincible war machine had been shattered. The Dominion forces retreated, broken and humiliated. A single message was broadcasted across the galaxy. Humanity does not bow. Humanity does not forget. And humanity does not forgive. The lesson had been learned. Never again would the Dominion underestimate an enemy. Never again would they assume superiority guaranteed victory. And never again would they dare to challenge the species that had defied them and survived. Humanity had changed. They were no longer just another race in the galaxy. They were something else, something unstoppable. And from that moment on, the Dominion knew one unshakable truth. You only go to war with humans once.